Hello everyone, welcome back, and today in this video I wanted to go through and rank every single Barcelona's players season 1 to 10, just talking about how good I think they did, how well I think they performed given the circumstances, and basically just go through every single player and give my opinions on the season that they had. And so starting in goal with Ter Stegen, I think he's a player that definitely splits opinions from Barcelona fans, and there are some people that want him out of the club, there's some people that think Barcelona need an improvement in that position, and overall I don't think Ter Stegen had the best year, just like a lot of players in the squad. And I will say that I think we saw the importance that he had when Iñaki Peña stepped up and he played for 2 months because of that back injury that Ter Stegen had. And he was a huge improvement, Ter Stegen was, when Iñaki Peña, did not have a very good couple of months when he was the first goalkeeper at Barcelona. So I do think maybe I learned a little bit more of an appreciation for Ter Stegen. And I think overall he's definitely had very good seasons in La Liga. The big question with him has always been, those big Champions League games, can he save Barcelona? Can he make the saves that keep them in the game? And yeah, I think that's a big question for a lot of Barcelona fans. But overall, just looking at this season, I think he's been decent. I don't think he's been exceptional, just like a lot of players in the squad. But I will say that injury that he had, I think it did show the importance because some people were saying, let's play Iñaki Peña. And in those first couple games that Iñaki Peña had, he looked very good. But then, Ter Stegen came back and we needed him to come back. And I think he did help the back line. But overall, I'm just going to give him a 6 out of 10. I think he's had a relatively decent season. I don't think he went above and beyond. He said himself, he needs to personally do better, and he can look to improve, which is nice. But yeah, overall, I'm going to give him a 6 out of 10. I think he's had a pretty decent season, but I don't really want to go any higher than that. And then the second goalkeeper is Iñaki Peña, who got 2 months of playing time when Ter Stegen was out injured. And I think, like I said, in that first couple games that he had, I think it was against Atletico Madrid, he had a very good performance, and then it might have been in the Champions League, where he performed very well. But then after that, it just kind of went downhill, and yeah, I think he maybe lost a little bit of confidence over time, and it didn't really work out. I'm just going to give him a 4 out of 10. I think, he did look very promising. I think he was on loan to Galatasaray, and he came up against Barcelona. I think he looked very good in that game, and I was excited for him to return to the club, but I don't really see him ever being the first choice goalkeeper at the club. I hope I'm wrong about that. Maybe he would step up and make a lot of improvement and then eventually become the first team starter. But yeah, that 2 months that he had, I don't think it was very reassuring. And I think Ter Stegen was definitely a big improvement when he came back. So I can't really give him a 6 or a 5. I feel like a 4 is a fair number. Could be wrong about that, but yeah, Iñaki Peña, 4 out of 10. And then moving on to right back is Jules Kounde, and I think overall, maybe he's had some ups and downs this season, but I think he's been a positive influence on the team. I don't think there have been some games where, I've said, oh, Kounde was horrible, he needs to be sold. I've never once thought that Kounde should be sold this year, and I think he is a positive performer in the team. I think he has a bright future at the club. And maybe his best position is at right back because earlier this season, he did play a couple games at center back and he just did not do very well there. He really struggled against Brian Zaragoza, who scored 2 great goals against him. And yeah, I think in those big games, though, a lot of people were worried about the matchup between him and Kvaratskhelia. He did so well in that tie against Napoli. Then he also came up against Mbappe on the left wing and did very well against him. So I think overall, in those big moments, I think he did play very well. He definitely has a couple mistakes in his locker for sure, but overall, I think this season he's been pretty positive, so I'm going to give him a 7 out of 10. And then moving on to the center backs is Ronald Araujo, and I think his number would be a lot different if that game versus PSG never happened, because overall, I think he was having a pretty good season. The whole team, again, I think were underperforming for a large majority of the season, but he was having a good year, I think personally. And anytime you'd ask me who's Barcelona's best defender, I would always say Araujo, and I hope he stays at the club. I hope he has a bright future, and he stays for many years. But yeah, that mistake against PSG, you cannot overlook that. And that was a season-defining mistake because it knocked Barcelona out of the Champions League. And, there are no ways around it. Yeah, Cancelo had some bad mistakes. Maybe Xavi could have made a better substitution instead of taking out Lamine Yamal. But, those factors would not have happened if Araujo did not give away such a terrible red card. Yeah, I'm not even going to go too far into it because it's just such a bad mistake. But yeah, you can't get your team knocked out of the Champions League and expect to have a very good season, you know what I'm saying? He did very well, I think, for, 30 or 40 games this season. I think he was very good. He's a very positive outlook for Barcelona, but that mistake against PSG, that's going to change the number for me. I think overall, without that mistake, he would have had a 7 or 8 out of 10 season, but with that mistake, I'm going to have to say it's a 4 or a 5. I'll just go 5 because, I don't know, maybe people would disagree with me because he knocked Barcelona out of the Champions League. You don't want to blame it on one person, but that mistake, ultimately, that caused the downfall of Barcelona's Champions League run. So I'm going to just say 5 out of 10. Maybe some people would disagree with me, but yeah, it's difficult to define an entire year based on one mistake, but it's in the biggest moment of the season for the club, so yeah, I'm going to go 5 out of 10. And then moving on to another center back is Pau Cubarsí, who's just, his rise to the first team was incredible. You know, Barcelona, I think they needed someone to come into that position with Christensen moving into the midfield, and Inigo Martinez was struggling with injuries. And Cubarsí came, and he did so well, especially in the first month. I mean, just such dominant displays against Mbappe. You know, in Barcelona's league games, I mean, he was so good. And then he got a call up to the Spanish national team. I mean, he has such a bright future ahead of him. And I think, you know, there have been some comments, Cubarsí has not been very good in the past couple weeks, but I think he's just struggling like everyone in the team because it just looks very unorganized. Barcelona as a team, all the 11 players just look all over the place. So I'm not really going to judge based on that. I think the way that he came into the season, it was such a great surprise. And I'd never seen someone like with that little experience be so good and composed on the ball. It was incredible. I mean, we have high expectations with La Masia, but to produce a player like that, and at 17 be able to be introduced into the first team. I think he made his debut when he was 16 or had just turned 17. I mean, that's truly incredible. So I think he's had a very good season individually. And yeah, maybe the last couple weeks he hasn't been as good, but I will not forget those performances that he had in the Champions League. I mean, he got man of the match in that game against Napoli or PSG, whichever one. I mean, and everyone was around just celebrating with him. That was incredible. So overall, just given the fact that he was just introduced so quickly and adapted so well to the first team, and really was one of the better players on the field for a lot of the games, I'm going to give him a 9 out of 10. I think the season that he had was just incredible, and I think we all know how good he was. You know, maybe, who knows if Hansi Flick is going to have him as the first center back for the club next season, but overall, just this, 3-4 months that he had, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10 because I don't think we really could have expected much better from a 17-year-old making his first debut with the first team. I mean, just incredible. So yeah, I'm going to go 9 out of 10. And then the other center back is Inigo Martinez, and I think he's been pretty good. I think he's been a relatively good squad player to have, and I think it was a good signing to bring him in on a free transfer. Obviously, he struggled with injuries. He hasn't been available, which, does play into how good his season has been overall because, I think he's only had, I want to say like 5 to 8 starts. I could be wrong about that number. But yeah, I think he's been pretty good when he's been called upon. And he's a good player to have in the squad. But I don't really see him being a starting center back for Barcelona. Maybe next year, who knows? I think he was playing very well before that injury, especially at the beginning of the season. But, he just wasn't available as much as he maybe could have been. But yeah, he's just been injury prone, unfortunately, for the last couple of years. But I think overall, when he was called upon, he did pretty decent. So I'm going to give him a 6 out of 10. Moving on to left back, I'm going to start with Joao Cancelo. And I think his number, again, just like Araujo, it's going to fluctuate a lot because of the big moments that he had. And I think at the beginning of the season, he was so good. The first 6 months at the club, he was one of the better performing players at the club. But, man, those games against PSG, he gave away, one of the worst penalties I've ever seen. And then also in that game, in the Clásico, all 3 of the goals from Madrid came from that side. So it's hard to look past that because, in those big moments, that's when you want your players to step up. And I will say, we have to give credit where it's due. He was one of the reasons why Barcelona did place first in their Champions League group because of his great performance against Porto with a goal and an assist. Yeah, he was very good. And I think he had moments this season where he did really, really well. But it's just those big moments that it's hard to look past those when you think of the season as a whole because that's what comes to your mind. And yeah, I would say the first beginning of the season, I would say it's an 8 out of 10. But then the last couple weeks, maybe the last month of the season, it'd be a 4 out of 10. So, I don't know. Can we meet in the middle? I would maybe say a 6 out of 10. But, I could go lower than that because of the last couple performances that he had, especially, I think of those games against PSG and, of course, that game against Real Madrid, which, ultimately lost Barcelona the league, even though it looked kind of like a long shot anyways. But yeah, those were just really poor performances, so maybe a 5 or 6 out of 10. Maybe I'll just go 5.5 out of 10. And that could be a little bit harsh on him because he did so well. So maybe it's recency bias that I'm giving him that low of a rating. I don't know what you all think about that, but yeah, I'll go 5.5. Maybe I'll just go 6 out of 10. I think that's fair. So 6 out of 10 for Cancelo. Then up next is Alejandro Balde, who, of course, before this season, he was so good last year. He was one of the reasons why Barcelona's backline was just incredible and broke the clean sheet record. Yeah, he was so good, but this season, I just think he got off to a pretty slow start. I think a lot of people were questioning some of the... he just wasn't able to really give that much offensively. I still think defensively he's very good, and going forward, he can always learn and grow into that role. But yeah, I think he's very good, and I'm really excited for his future. I think, in my opinion, he still is one of the best in the world in his position. but he was not having the best season. And then he got injured for, I think it was 4 months. Yeah, so I'm just going to give him a 5 out of 10 because I think before the injury he was not doing very good. And then he got the long-term injury. So yeah, I think 5 out of 10 is fair, but I'm really excited for next season. I think Balde is going to have a great year, and I hope he can stay healthy because, in my opinion, he is one of the most important players on the team when he is fit and doing very well. So yeah, I'm really excited for next season with him under Hansi Flick. And also I wanted to rate Hector Fort because I think when he's came in, he's been very good. And like Kubarsi, just to have that great of a rise to the first team and be able to show yourself that you have the quality to compete in the first team at 17 years old, that's such an incredible achievement. And maybe his rating is going to be, well, his rating is going to be higher than Cancelo and Balde for me, but that's just because of the opportunities that he's had. I think he's made the most of every single time he's came on the field. You know, there were maybe some games where he just looked off and maybe didn't look up to speed. But I mean, the last game that he, I think, started, he had such a great assist to Fermín López. Yeah, I think he's very good. I think he has a bright future at the club. And this season, overall, like Kubarsi, you know, maybe you'll say that Kubarsi's rating is pretty high, but I'm just basing it based on the chances that he had, you know, because he definitely could have maybe started a couple more games. But with Cancelo in front of him, it's understandable that he was not getting as many minutes. And he's also being played on the left-hand side when he's naturally a right-footed player and usually plays on the right side. He's done very well in that position. I really like him on that side. So, yeah, I'm going to give him a 7 out of 10. I think the chances that he had, he did very well. He looked very solid. Looked like he was in his place in the team. So I think 7 out of 10 is a fair rating for me. And then moving into the midfield, I'll start with the defensive midfielder, which is Andreas Christensen. And I think he did very well to transition into the midfield. Obviously, he didn't look natural and he didn't look completely comfortable at times. You know, maybe he was taking too long on the ball and he turned the ball over, or, you know, maybe he wasn't doing anything super flashy, but I don't think that's what the club wanted from him. I think they knew they needed a player like his profile in the midfield, and he went into that role pretty well, I think. And in my opinion, he was one of the bigger misses in that game against PSG in the second leg because he picked up that yellow card in the first leg. You know, maybe things could have went differently, but that's in the past. We can't do anything about that now. But yeah, I think overall, Christensen had a pretty positive year. You know, he definitely could have played at center back, and I think he did very well in that position the season before this one. But it's what the team needed, so he stepped into the midfield, and I think he did the job there. You know, he did what was asked, and it was what the club needed at the time, so I'm going to give him a 7.5 out of 10. I think he was very solid in that position. Maybe not his long-term position, but it's what the club needed at the time, and he stepped up. So, yeah, 7 out of 10. Then moving on to Romeu, and I just want to say on a personal level, I just feel really bad for the way that the situation was handled and the way those events unfolded, because he was an important piece of Girona's team last year. He had a very positive season. You know, Barcelona thought, hey, this is a good, cheap signing that we can make. He can probably do the job as a defensive midfielder, and that's what the club needed with Busquets leaving. It did not work out at all. I mean, every single time he came on the field, it just seemed like he was losing the ball in a really dangerous area. He was giving away 1 or 2 really bad passes. Yeah, it was really poor, obviously. There are no ways around it. I'm just going to have to say 4 out of 10. Maybe even like a 2 out of 10. I feel bad saying that. I definitely hope he's not watching this, which he's not, hopefully. Yeah, I just feel bad. On a personal level, it would have been really nice for his career if he stayed at Girona, but, you know, he wanted to try his luck at Barcelona. It just didn't work out. He just didn't look like he had that quality on the ball, and it just looked like his confidence from the beginning, it just didn't look up to that level needed for the club. And I think in the first 1 or 2 games that he had, I was like, man, he can maybe do the job there. Nah, it did not work out. And yeah, I'm just going to go 4 out of 10 to be nice, but yeah, it could be lower than that. But you know, he was a cheap signing. I think he's going to leave, and there's going to be no problems with him leaving in the summer. So yeah, I'll go 4 out of 10. And then continuing with the midfield, I'll start with İlkay Gündoğan, who I think had a very good season. He was very consistent, and to be available almost every single game was really impressive. Obviously came on a free signing, so it was just great business from the club. He has pretty high wages, but that's kind of expected because he just came from a treble-winning Man City squad that he captained. So it was obvious he was going to have pretty high wages, but I think overall he had a very positive season. He was one of the better performing players. I think he was always chipping in, maybe with a goal or an assist, but also just overall pretty good performances. I think there were some times, I'll be honest, where maybe he just went missing in games, but that could just be how the squad was playing. I felt like it was pretty similar with the way that City was playing. He was just making runs and he was moving off the ball. And sometimes he was being played in a position that maybe didn't get the best out of him. You know, he was having defensive priorities that, you know, maybe just didn't allow him those runs in behind that he did very well. You know, and especially I think at the beginning of the season, we saw how big of a signing he was going to be. I think overall, it was a great addition for sure. I think maybe individually, there were times where I think maybe he just didn't have the best performance. He looked a little bit off, or he just wasn't making the impact that a player like Gündoğan could be making. But overall, I'm not talking negative about him at all, because he was the second best player on the club in my opinion. So I'm going to give him a 9 out of 10 season. But for it to be a 10 out of 10, I just think maybe he could have marked his influence on some games a little bit more. But again, maybe that was the role that he was playing. I think overall, he was definitely one of the better performers in the club. I think, in my opinion, he was the second best. So, yeah, I'm going to give him a 9 out of 10. I think overall, he had a very good debut season with the club, and I'm excited for him next year under Hansi Flick. And then moving on to Gavi, and I'm not even going to rank him, because overall, before that injury, he was having a 10 out of 10 season. He was incredible. He was doing so well, and he was the most important player on the squad, in my opinion. And we all saw that when he left, because that was really when Barcelona's season went downhill, was when he got injured. And such an unnecessary injury, because, I mean, why are you playing him in a useless friendly when he's being played it's Barcelona and the Spanish national team's fault. It's a friendly against Cyprus. Why is he starting? That's so frustrating. But anyways, he was having such a good season, and I don't really want to rank it because, it wasn't his fault, because it was just such a long-term, terrible injury. But I'm really excited for him to come back. Overall, before that injury, 10 out of 10 season from him, and he's just such a promising player. And I think some people, on Twitter, that some people that don't watch him, maybe they're looking at compilations and they don't see much. But man, if you watch 90 minutes and you see Gavi, he's just one of the most important players on the team. And obviously, we saw how big of an impact he was making, because when he was no longer playing, that's when the team started playing horrible. So, yeah, overall, Gavi's just such an incredible player. I'm really excited for next season, and I hope that he can have a quick recovery. But yeah, 10 out of 10 before that injury, in my opinion. And then up next is Pedri, who, again, this season struggled with injuries. It's just really unfortunate the way that his season, happened, because, yeah, he was obviously really frustrated with it as well. He just wants to be on the field playing, but it just can't happen because of those injuries. And to be honest, that's Barcelona and the Spanish national team's fault again, because they played him for 70 games when he was 18, 19 years old. Really poor planning yet again from the club and from the Spanish national team. But, he's just an incredible player when he's able to play. We saw in that last game, I think, against Sevilla, he's just so fun and enjoyable to watch. He's one of the best players on the team, if not the best when he's healthy. But you've got to be available, to get a good ranking. Obviously with Gavi, that's just because it was such a bad injury and because he was basically out for the entire year. But with Pedri, he was here and there. Sometimes he'd get injured and then he'd be able to play for a couple games. So I think overall, he looked very good when he was playing, but because of the injuries, because he wasn't available, I'm just going to give him a 6 out of 10 season. But it could be a 7 out of 10. I think when he's healthy, if he was playing 50 games a season, I think it'd have to be a 9 out of 10, because he's just so good and fun and enjoyable to watch. One of the best players on the team, but yeah, I'm going to go 6 out of 10 because of the season that he had. And then up next is Frenkie de Jong, who also did struggle with injuries this season. But yeah, I'm going to give him the same rating. I'm just going to go 6 out of 10 because I think there were some games where he just didn't have the impact that you want him to have. And, players like Joao Cancelo and Joao Felix, they talk about how good he is and how much he surprised them because of how great he was on the ball and just the calmness and composure that he had. But there are just some games where, some people clown him on Twitter and basically say all he does is spin and pass the ball backwards. That's obviously not true, but I just think the role that Xavi had him in, it just wasn't getting the best out of him. And, Frenkie de Jong under Ronald Koeman, I think he was doing very well because he was getting the freedom to roam forward and do what he wanted on the ball. But I think when you ask him to go back defensively and you're not playing with a true defensive midfielder alongside him, it really just doesn't work out. He's just not good defensively. He doesn't have, the defensive mindset that you need to have where you're always on guard. And yeah, he just isn't very good in that role, to be honest. And so I think overall, it's a 6 out of 10 season from me. I don't think it was the best from Frenkie de Jong. I still think he has a ton of talent. He's one of the most talented players on the squad. But, for a player of how much quality he has, you're expecting more. And I just don't think in these games, he really was able to put a footprint on these games. So I'm going to give him a 6 out of 10. And then up next is Fermín López, who no one expected to have a crucial role in the team, but Xavi kept him, and he paid him back in full because Fermín López, he was great, especially in this last half of the season, to have a profile that's able to add goals and contribute from the midfield and make runs in behind. That was so nice to see because Barcelona, they have a lot of players that are great on the ball, that like to pass it around, but that don't really like to move. And Fermín López, just like Gavi, he's that player that can make runs in behind and could do a lot of pressing. I think Fermín López was always giving 100%. He was a very positive performer in this team, so I'm going to give him a 9 out of 10. And, earlier in the season, I think he just didn't have that impact that maybe some fans wanted because sometimes he just wasn't the best on the ball. But you just want a different profile. And Fermín López, I mean, he's great. And some fans are saying he should be starting next season. It'd be difficult to bench him after the year that he's had. And I think about that game against Shakhtar. He was so good. I think he hit the post like 4 times in that game and also scored finally. But overall, yeah, I think he's such an interesting player to have on the squad because, he's not your typical Spanish midfielder. He's someone that can contribute from the midfield with goals, and he's just a workhorse as well. I think he's a very positive impact on the team. So, yeah, I'm going to give him a 9 out of 10. And then Sergio Roberto, I'm just going to give him a 5 out of 10. I think a lot of people really do like to slander him, and I understand it. I still, it's difficult to understand the club continue to renew him year after year and playing him in midfield because there are some times when it works, he can do the job. But in those big moments, he just is not good enough in that position. And I think the game against Girona, he lost the ball. It was really bad giveaway. Then also in the Copa del Rey, I think he lost it. I want to say in the game against Bilbao. Yeah, I mean, it just wasn't really good enough for him to be honest. And yeah, but we can't really expect that much different because I think he does a decent job. But when you play Sergio Roberto in midfield for long enough, those things are going to happen. Those mistakes are going to come. So it's not really his fault. And if he's on a low salary, it's not the worst signing. Like, I think some people are like, it's just going to be terrible if they renew him. I don't think it's probably the best idea given the quality that maybe another player could add if they're able to sign him. But Sergio Roberto, he's a good squad player to have. But if you're starting him in midfield, those things are going to happen. So, yeah, I'm just going to give him a 5 out of 10 on this season. And then moving on to the attackers, I'm going to start on the left with Joao Felix because, I think at the beginning of the season, I thought I was going to be proven wrong because in the summer I was just thinking it's probably not a necessary signing. I just didn't think he really had a place in the team and if he was going to be good enough. But then he came on a very low loan fee. I mean, yeah, that was great. That signing to add Joao Felix, a player with quality to the team, for that low of a salary, that was a good idea. And I think he did have some pretty good performances. He was sometimes enjoyable to watch in moments of the game. But I just think a lot of times he just drifts in and out. He's just not able to make the impact that a player of his quality could be making. Sometimes he just doesn't work hard enough. And yeah, I think overall he had a relatively decent time at the club. There were some moments that he gave where he looked very good. That performance against Atletico Madrid in the first half of the season was incredible. He was so good. But if you can do that every single week, I would give him a 9 out of 10. But it just doesn't happen, really. There are a lot of times where he just doesn't make the impact and he's just, I don't want to say ghosting, but he's just not really appearing in these games. So I'm just going to give him a 6 out of 10 on the season. I think that's fair. And, I'm hit or miss if Barcelona should renew him, if they should try and loan him out again next season. Kind of depends if Hansi Flick wants him in the squad, but for this season, I'm just going to give him a 6 out of 10. And then up next is Ferran Torres, and I think a lot of fans are maybe saying he should be sold in the summer. I still think he has a lot of quality. It's just the club have not been able to get the best out of him. He was a great player at Man City, and with the Spanish national team, he has a very good goal-scoring record. I think if you can unlock the best of Ferran Torres, he can still be a positive impact on the team. But this season, it was just another one of those where he was, he did get a hat trick one game. That was nice to see. I think he also scored a free kick, which was the first since Messi had left. So he does give some pretty decent moments. I think he is a good player to have. But, sometimes you just expect him to maybe be making more of an impact or being a little bit better with his finishing. But in my opinion, with those type of conversations, I do enjoy when a player is actually getting in those positions to score, even if he's not putting them away most of the time. But yeah, Ferran Torres, overall, I'm just going to give him a 6 out of 10 on this season. I don't think he did really anything great, but he also wasn't terrible every time he came on, so I think a 6 out of 10 is fair. And then moving on to Robert Lewandowski, and if you watch my videos earlier this season, yeah, I don't think that he was very good. And in the first half of the season, don't get me wrong, I think he was really poor. He was complaining about the service that he was getting. Yeah, he wasn't getting like very many one-on-ones, but it's because he wasn't moving. And he tries to play at this like hold-up striker. He tries to go into the left wing and get some touches. And just you're not good enough in that position, to be honest. I mean, I don't want to slander him. I think his best position is staying in the middle and trying to get into the box. But there were a lot of times when Lamine Yamal would go to the sideline and he would take someone on. He would dribble in the middle, pass the ball, and Lewandowski's nowhere to be found. There were a lot of times like that this season where it was frustrating, and a lot of the touches that he would have, and just some of the passes that he would make, the decision making was really poor. We also cannot forget in that game against PSG, he had a 3-on-2. 2 defenders right in front of him, Ferran Torres on his right and Joao Felix on his left. What's the best position? What's the best decision you can make? Maybe just shoot it directly at the 2 defenders right in front of you. That's the best thing you can do. Yeah, Lewandowski, obviously, not one of my favorite players on the squad, I'll be honest. But I think that's pretty poor decision making from him in that big moment. But there were some games. I think in that first leg against PSG, that was his best performance ever in a Barcelona jersey, in my opinion. He's very good. His hold-up play was great. He was the outlet for Ter Stegen to play a long ball. He could take it down with his chest and pass it off to Lamine Yamal. That was great. I think some of the times when he's able to do that, he's good. And don't get me wrong, in the second half of the season, he stepped up massively. I think Lewandowski, he was one of those big players that did change the momentum of the club, because when Xavi announced he was leaving, Lewandowski really stepped up. He really took it on his own to say, I need to be better, and he was. But going into next season, I'm not exactly excited for him to be the starting striker every single week. I hope that's not the case. Or you know what? I hope he completely proves me wrong, and I hope he gets back to his very best. But yeah, there are just some times when I just don't think he's doing very well, and he's pretty frustrating to watch, I'll be completely honest. And it just looks like Barcelona are pretty... They're just easy to defend against because Lewandowski, sometimes he's just trying to get fouls, which is helpful for the team, you get fouled, you get a free kick, but there are just times when there's no one running in behind, and it's just kind of like, Lamine Yamal, let's see what you can do. See if you can change the game, see if you can unlock the defense. Lewandowski just, kind of sit in the box, which I don't think it's bad for him to do that, and in the end, he did end up with maybe 19, 20 goals in La Liga, which is good, to be honest. But I watched every game for Barcelona. I just don't think overall he was the best player for the squad. So I'm just going to give him a 6.5 out of 10. I think the beginning of the season was about a 4. The last half of the season, I think he was one of the better players on the squad, and that would be an 8. So I'll just go 6. I think that's a pretty decent number for Lewandowski, so 6 out of 10 for him. And then for Vitor Roque, for me, it's difficult to give him a rating because every single time he came on for Barcelona, he was in the last 10-15 minutes of the game, and he was sometimes being played as a left winger, so we didn't really get to see him in his best position, starting with, the best players at Barcelona. But I think overall, he looked pretty promising sometimes when he came on. There were moments where maybe he was losing the ball a little bit too easily. His touches weren't the best. Maybe he's not up to the speed of La Liga currently, but that's not really expected because, he just came from the Brazilian league and his first couple months in a top European league. So I'm still really excited for his future. I hope he can give a lot to Barcelona. But overall, I'll just give this season for him a 6 out of 10. And maybe you'd be thinking, is Lewandowski and Vitor Roque really going to get the same rating? Because obviously Lewandowski gave more to the club, but I'm basically just going off the chances that Vitor Roque got, because he got 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the game. Lewandowski was getting 90 minutes almost every single game in the first half of the season, and then sometimes he'd come off at like the 75th, 80th minute. So, I think that's fair. You could disagree with me on that. Maybe Lewandowski deserves a little bit higher rating, and Vitor Roque could, I guess, be lower. But yeah, I'm just going to give Vitor Roque a 6 out of 10 because with the chances that he had, I think he was showing some promise. Then moving on to the right is Raphinha, and I think he did struggle with some injuries, especially in the first half of the season, and he got that really terrible red card against Getafe in the first game of the season. But I think overall, he was positive, and like last year, he was the difference maker in a lot of games. He was chipping in with a goal and an assist. Sometimes maybe not making the best decisions, not the best dribbler. And I think, like I've said, I think his best position would possibly be as a right attacking midfielder if you can somehow build the team around him. But, you don't want to lose a midfielder if Raphinha maybe isn't giving the best. But I think what Fermín López is doing, Raphinha could do very well in that position. I think as a right winger, though, Lamine Yamal has been better than him this season. That's no real offense to Raphinha because, Lamine Yamal has just been that good. But I think Raphinha, when he's came on, and we cannot forget those big moments that he had. Those games against PSG, he was Barcelona's best player. He was the best player on the field in both of those games. So I think Raphinha, overall, he deserves a lot of praise for those performances. He was still chipping in, and he was scoring massive goals for the club. So I'm going to give him an 8 out of 10. I think overall, he did have a positive season. And in those big moments, he stepped up. You want a player that can step up and doesn't, fold under pressure. Raphinha did very well in those games. So I'm going to give him an 8 out of 10. And I might be forgetting some players, but the last player I'm going to rate is Lamine Yamal, who, in my opinion, he deserves a 10 out of 10. He's been the best player at the club. He's been the most enjoyable to watch. I think some people would just tune in to watch him play. He's that good. I don't want to just overhype or anything. I'm just going to leave it at, he was an incredible player to watch and just so impressive this entire season and was the difference maker in a lot of games. He was unlocking a defense. He just plays with so much confidence and joy. So